அமைச்சர் பெருமக்கள், மாண்புமிகு வேறவர்களே, மாண்புமிகு எம்ஆர்கே பன்னீர்செல்வம் அவர்களே, மாண்புமிகு சிவசங்கர் அவர்களே, மாண்புமிகு ராஜேந்திரன் அவர்களே, தருமபுரி மேற்கு மாவட்ட கழகத்தினுடைய பொறுப்பாளர் அன்பிற்கினிய பழனியப்பன் அவர்களே, வருகை தந்திருக்கக்கூடிய நாடாளுமன்ற சட்டமன்ற உறுப்பினர்களே, உள்ளாட்சி அமைப்பினுடைய பிரதிநிதிகளே, தோழமை கட்சிகளை சார்ந்திருக்கக்கூடிய தோழர்களே, நண்பர்களே, ஒருங்கிணைந்த தருமபுரி மாவட்ட ஒன்றிய நகர பேரூர் கிளை கழகத்துடைய நிர்வாகிகளே, கழகத்தின் பல்வேறு அணிகளை சார்ந்திருக்கக்கூடிய நண்பர்களே, மணக்கோலம் போன்றிருக்கக்கூடிய மணமக்களே, மணமக்களுடைய பெற்றோர், உற்றார், உறவினர்களே, பெரியோர்களே, தாய்மார்களே, என் உயிரோடு கலந்திருக்கக்கூடிய தலைவர் கலைஞர் அவர்களின் உயிரினும் உயிரான அன்பு உடன்பிறப்புகளே, உங்கள் அனைவருக்கும் என்னுடைய அன்பான வணக்கம். மணி அவர்களுடைய இல்லத்தில் நடைபெறக்கூடிய இந்த திருமண விழாவில் கலந்து கொண்டு மணவிழா நிகழ்ச்சி நடத்தி வைத்து மணவிழா கொண்டிருக்கக்கூடிய நம்முடைய மணமக்களை வாழ்த்தக்கூடிய ஒரு வாய்ப்பு எனக்கு கிடைத்திருக்கிறது. அதை எண்ணி நான் மகிழ்ச்சி அடைகிறேன், பெருமைப்படுகிறேன். மணி அவர்களை பற்றி இங்கே இருக்கக்கூடிய எல்லாருக்கும் நல்லா தெரியும். இன்றைக்கு கூட எந்த சூழ்நிலையில் இந்த நிகழ்ச்சிக்கு வந்திருக்கிறார் என்பது பலருக்கும் தெரியும் என்று நான் கருதுகிறேன். அவர் சில நாட்களுக்கு முன்பு உடல் நலிவுற்று மருத்துவமனையில் அனுமதிக்கப்பட்டிருந்த நிலையில் நாளைய தினம், இன்றைய தினமே சென்னைக்கு சென்று மருத்துவமனையில் அனுமதிக்க வேண்டிய கட்டாயத்திற்கு ஆளாகி இருக்கக்கூடிய நிலையில் அவர் இந்த நிகழ்ச்சிக்காக மருத்துவர்களுடைய அனுமதி பெற்று இங்கே வந்திருக்கிறார். ஆக உடல்நலத்தை பற்றி இல்லாமல் கவலைப்படாமல் தலைவர் வருகிறார். அதுவும் நம்முடைய வீட்டில் நடைபெறக்கூடிய திருமண நிகழ்ச்சியில் பங்கேற்க வருகிறார். உடல்நலத்தை விட எனக்கு அதுதான் முக்கியம் என்ற அந்த உணர்வோடு இந்த நிகழ்ச்சிக்கு வந்திருப்பதை எண்ணி நாமெல்லாம் 1987
contribution stemmed from a simple yet radical dream that India's greatest wealth would not lie just in its natural resources, but in the power of its people and their capacity to learn and to dream. From that dream grew an important part of the Tata Trust's 133-year legacy for building and nurturing centers of excellence across science and art. Each represents a promise, a conviction that knowledge and directed to this progress forms the foundation for nation building. This thesis of progress may serve not just to nature, but in human crisis, continues to guide the rest of the Tata Trust today. The semester occurs in our partnership with the Nobel Prize outreach, an alliance based between Indian philanthropy and the world's first institution for the building the pursuit of knowledge. Together, we experience the country to find that the most that ideas must travel forward, knowledge must be harnessed to serve humanity, and the young must be empowered not just to invent the world, but to shape and lead. The city that we meet here in the city of innovation to ask what is the future we want and how we might build it. From the fact that the future is that it is never static. It's always dynamic, it's always evolving, and it's based on the work that has been done in the past. And significantly, and I think a lot of us who are gathered here today, in the future began at the first when we freed ourselves into the workplace. In the most faith-filled people, I think that has ever been made by myself and the Jawaharlal Nehru, and I think that this building in the Parliament and the country assembly was a perfect midnight hour. 11 years ago, we made the first rejection, and now the time comes when we shall begin our test. Not only or in some measure, but very substantial. At the first of the midnight hour, when the world sleeps, India is the road to life and freedom. And when we finish the things that were in history, when we step the road to the new, when the day dawns, and when the soul of the nation longs for peace, find better. Because that after 7 years, there is dedication to the service of India and the people and to the full larger cause of humanity. And the rescue. But the important guidance is that we will say that we will fulfill the purpose, and the one we practice today. But even though known, the service of the movement is proper. It's not only to remove it, and reduce an inequality of opportunity. The ambition of the greatest of our generation, and he was brought into the party of the nation, was going to wipe every tear from every eye. That may be the way back. But as long as there are tears and suffering, the rest will not be over. And I think that is the North Star of every Indian website. That is the North Star on which every institution serves to deliver. And then, in 1991 was extraordinary. The first important moment when together by 4 times the Prime Minister, TamilNaduPolitics, and the late Finance Minister, and then the Prime Minister, Manmohan Singh, to put in the first place the growth policy, and the nation with a Hindu rate of growth, 3.5% per annum. And we then moved into a high growth order test, with the growth consistently averaging 8% in this book, moving the government of the property, I'm very glad to say here that in this audience, part of that dream team which led India, unsettled India, and that's documented in Aliyah. Please give him a big hand. Current Prime Minister, Honorable Sri Narendra Modi ji, who is giving us the goal of Viksit Bharat 2047. He is very eloquently said, Sabka Vikas, Sabka Prayas, Sabka Sath. And I think that is the goal post that drives Indians now towards achieving the next goal of economic and social empowerment. We are today well on our way to being the third largest economy in the world. We are already the fifth largest. But that's not where we are. The people of this largest justice are the constitution said, social, economic, and political. So I'm not going to say what we do. Also, in this part of the future, where young people are encouraged to question, imagine, and build. Our role as institutions, philanthropists, scientists, and economists, if we ensure that we get the tools, the opportunities, and the freedom to do this, and they are not less striving for themselves. This is the idea of the Tata Trust, continue to strengthen India's knowledge infrastructure, from the Tata Institute of Economic Research to the National Center for the Performing Arts. This was one of RNC's dreams and visions and is latest in a last course into genetics and society. We want to build ecosystems that nurture intelligence, encourage co-working, and spark innovation, making those who need it most, not just hands, but like a head. The next policies to his belief in sustainable community-led development lays the foundation for a commitment to lasting transformative impact. Our vision for this system, community appointment pathway, this is a concept that is positively impacting the lives of millions of underserved communities. And at the same time, as we learn the problem, between the downside value, world of faith, teamwork, and freedom, just beautiful ideas and exchanges between discipline, culture, and privilege. There is space for science and compassion to exist, as there is space for ambition alongside empathy. These are the three rights that involve the human society. To moderation with intention, in order to serve humanity beyond and beyond life. Together, let us enter this dialogue with curiosity and hope, and tackle the continuing open work of young people. In the center of engagement with interaction with history, let us then build a range of books, in practice, in laboratory, in privilege, and in the home to open young persons working to change together. Thank you and welcome once again to the class. I'd like to invite onto stage Director of the Nobel Foundation, Hannah Frenner. Very distinct work.
Now we will start the first session, and our first speaker is James Robinson. So James is awarded the 2024 Economic Prize for studies of how institutions are formed and affect prosperity. And in fact, it was James's work that really inspired this theme, the future we want, because we could look at it through the lens of institutions. What kind of institutions create progress? He's an economist and political scientist. He is originally from the UK, but has built his academic career in the US. But he has built research projects in Bolivia, in Cameroon, in Chile, Colombia, Haiti, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, South Africa, Zimbabwe. And he is a fellow at the Institute of African Studies at the University of Nigeria. So he's published 3 books co-authored with Daud Nassimoglu. Most famously, the book Why Nations Fail. Luckily for us, the book also looked at why nations succeed. James, the floor is yours.
Wonderful. I'm going to stand here. No one told me where to stand, so this looks appropriate. Yes. Good morning. I'm delighted to be here. And I'm going to talk about prosperity and progress and whether or not more like a sort of inflection point You'll see what I mean by that when I get into the discussion. So, what and progress in my own academic discipline of economics and theorizing about prosperity and progress in many points in world history, but one thing it would be with to Adam Smith, and but also very important figure, the Scottish Enlightenment, Adam Ferguson. So, when urbanization, industrialization, a radical transformation, all the work we're industrializing, we're generating prosperity and progress. Scottish, etc. So what I'm going to call the one-way street movement of prosperity and progress. Kirkcaldy in Scotland. Okay. Now, the ridiculous at some level, social theory. In fact, if you look at the theory from that point on, the one-way theory. Henry from the name, I put the copy of his book, the modern anthropology, kind of the sociology of work, the British government formalized and codified comparative process of Western and Eastern law. Came up with this concept of you want contract. For socialism, or contracts better than socialism, better than capitalism, better than feudalism. How you get people to in the developing world who work values and institutions of the Western world. From our community, and one of the founders of direct economics, this famous paper in 1954, the Deal Economy, I'm going to explain it, but just to show you how much better the graphics are in academic journals than they were in the 1950s. You know, about economics, talk about economic institutions, but Adam Smith also, he wrote a book called The West of Nations, but he wrote about the study of moral sentiments. So that's about economics or marketing, about how to organize society, and what sort of values you have. And here's a famous photograph in the late 1960s in San Francisco of a lady expressing her emotion or an individual and put her away. Okay? Sort of encompassing package of liberal principles. Liberal society, individualism, liberal society, here is just a measure of prosperity, income per capita, which is, a picture of what they're calling at university and Comrade called the Great Convergence. Okay, the Great Convergence, you have an African society is going to be poor, equal, at the top you have the United States and Western Europe that have flourished economically. But, window that this movement is a great crisis at the moment. Kind of the equality from our Piketty in Paris. If you have people who have over that's about 1.6% of the world population. The world population own basically 50% of the entire wealth in the world. So, concentration will be not increasing at the moment. So, in a society where everybody is equal, everybody has the same rights, everybody has the same opportunities, how can that possibly be consistent with the concentration of wealth? So an economic inconsistency, we talk about many other parts of the world, just to get that, an ethnography of voters in the U.S. He's a sociologist at University of California. From beautiful okay, this is the most visual way of talking about the polarization in the United States. At the bottom is what's known as the flag of the country. Okay, you care about, no one cares about, you just fly over it to go to the other coast. Okay, so economic polarization, and man as well, if you want to know, there's so much antagonism towards nuclear institutions in the United States, but the next known he was 51 in the next country. He was a student at Yale. He wrote a book about what a horrible and unrepresentative place Yale University was. About the ideology of this liberal society. Well, for the first time in history, you could say, modern. So, Shanghai, it's the transformation of Shanghai between 1987 and 2017. You see the thing in the world of nothing. Okay. And it's stress test. About this is Martin Engels, the time of the 1848 revolution, when he wrote the Communist Manifesto. They have this beautiful phrase, into air. Only the same. I think it's discussing at the moment, world politics, geopolitics, the economy, it's melting. And okay? In England, we were talking about the 1 and 3 police. The Greek, of course. There's a famous frieze of the Battle of Marathon between the Greeks and the Persians. On the right, the very schoolboy. The Battle of was defeated by the Muslims from the with an arrow in his eye. Okay. Now, what is the Battle of Marathon to the Battle of Hastings? One of the founders of liberalism. The Battle of Marathon was much more important than the Battle of Hastings. Because we always disagree, about the Greeks. And what they see it means for now. It's clear. Democracy. They imported it. great Himalayan youth on the left is to do killing the out of my scope of academic between the kind of of Greek culture has no element of Mediterranean from the aspects of the one-way street. Absolute monarchy in the Americas of a different here's one of the levelers with a mirror in the English the work is that American indigenous society democratic constitutional government in the look in England or Europe and look at how American indigenous society to the group and the group what and that has been by John Stuart Mill what I call a two-way street and multiple way street. Why is that? Because anthropologist Victor Turner called the kind of unimaginable and your developing world for his whole life moment, okay? And this is from West Africa, from the Can Society in southern Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. What's called a crocodile. Well, you can see two heads of the crocodile. Crocodile but the crocodile is common, okay? By your community, individual and the society in the community. And this is part of what you're for. United States. So, we're not in a way that's possible in this one-way street model where people like you, the person telling people like you, how you can organize your society. It's not a story when you're first in the developing world in the past 30 or 40 years. Like that. You're more from other people than you're actually teaching them yourself. Okay? Okay, and I'm talking about the next if you like, to make the street two-way, multi-way, okay? You know, I think the current situation, the current crisis of Muslim society is going to be a much more hierarchical model of society. Computer, right? I mean, hierarchy, which is the pecking order. The hierarchy, the pecking order, and the chickens low down the pecking order. Primate ancestors. Society could emerge. Okay? Hours before, and it's really into itself in the late 19th century, in the 1930s, at the end of the Second World War. And I think from the future, and what determine also has deep evolutionary. I was very struck by this part from in the New York Times recently onto a week in China, and it's quite translated from the Chinese. You who that was a failed alternative chemicalism. Thing that would be good to discuss. Thank you. Thank you so much for introduction. And now our next speaker in this session is many worlds that are all connected. Nigeria, South Africa, Britain. She's a clinical professor of global public health and sustainable development at the University of Cambridge. She's the founder and CEO of Urban Better and an honorary professor at the University of Cape Town. Her work in medicine and cities, academia and advocacy, the global north and the global south. But yours.
Thank you for the kind introduction. It is an honor to contribute Professor Robinson Mayer. So, with Owen talking about driven by to hopefully show you how we'll make that secondly, if programs or inclusive in institutions learning from that will be the concept of that experimentation. To the end, right? So these are the three key takeaways that you come away with. The future-ready cities will recognize that open infrastructure and public infrastructure are one and the same. The second is that future-ready cities will be equipped to synergistically take synergistic action and building risk. Cities will cultivate hope and will cultivate for that urban transformation. And I'll get into that infrastructure and health infrastructure. I'm trained as a physician. I'm a doctor. Here. So the vast majority of factors that influence our health outside of the healthcare sector. So the environment where we live, where we work, where we play, where we connect. So our transport systems, our education systems, our energy infrastructure, our business and our food environment. So when we talk about youth and health, of course, healthcare is specific. Surgeon population health are designed to optimize health and not dilute it. Because health is about some good intentions. And by that I mean there is an inherent belief that we'll just do everything well. If you go center and think about how this environment can optimize health, just doing it well does not necessarily create health. You're taught that the body is a complex adaptive system, which means with an isolation. in an individual human way, but medicine in the the health of humans and the ecosystems that we depend on and the balance between those two. And what you see the kind of health the diseases, the respiratory disease, cancers, emerging and existing infectious diseases. So what you can see is to the left of those outcomes. And the physical environment, the air we breathe, the basic the ways we move, and our exposure to risk in those spaces. A role in shaping population health. As you move you see that outside of the healthcare sector. Are we teaching our planners? Are we teaching our engineers to create health? Or are we just focusing on cultivating capabilities in the healthcare sector to treat disease that is preventable? Or how can we create human development and thriving and the environment? The second point. That was with infrastructure and how everyone understands. The second point is the same environment where we're seeing health play out. We're also seeing the climate risk that people are exposed to compared to this happening cities. The Commission on pathways to a healthy net zero that I was honestly one of the commissioners on, and we looked at the health mitigation the existing evidence that exists. The three most critical benefits to climate mitigation actions, but to action on air pollution. The second was by dietary shift and the land use decisions that we make from that. So, new is agriculture, forestry, and land use. And the third is the things that shape the ways that we move. And you can see all of that. But there's another report that just a few weeks ago that looked at the synergies between the sustainable goals and climate action. I really recommend you to have a look at this, because one of the things that we found was that using the canvas of cities, interventions like time of vaccine or opening up green infrastructure, which is the way myself and Bangalore, I really appreciate your trees. That we see from cities, political development goals. So we need to or who's doing SDG work, or who's doing climate work, or who's doing in the context of regulation and constrained resources, we cannot afford the business as usual versus siloed approaches. Where health and climate and urban hazards meet. shows just why this is not an option. Those numbers represent the number of people moving into the cities per hour. So you can see and that the future is creating something now. So the in ways that move us into the direction of that future. And that brings me to my final point. The future-ready cities will cultivate hope as a catalyst for transformation. And really importantly, so far as well as the hope 3 times, hope needs infrastructure, needs institutions to support and shape it. We know, I'm currently sitting in the country, in the continent, in the region, globally even. This is more than technology, and I think we know this. It is what happens when ideas, when people, when decision-making learn together and experiment together. But really importantly, and just to a point that was made earlier by Mr. Sharma around young people in ways that shape the future, and doing so with here is that in order to do that, we have to ensure that we have the infrastructure for hope and sustained institutions that sustain that hope in order to ensure that the majority of young people, and not just some, are able to contribute to that. Fully equipped to navigate that volatility, that liminal state that you mentioned earlier. That liminal state requires that we interrogate how the purpose of our institutions, and to think about how to create institutions for the liminal space, not inside it. And how can we create institutions that enable us to act with urgency, courage, and compassion, especially when we don't perceive these risks as urgent. So the key is that the urgent risks that we encounter and the climate that we encounter is that we don't see your exposure to the urgency does not only result in the same way we expect to do it. You're exposed to SARS-CoV-2 virus, 4 to 7 days later you get there. You're exposed to a bacterial infection, a few days later you get there. But you're exposed to extreme heat, you're exposed to it doesn't have the thermal comfort. We can a month later, and perfect. Right? So does not see the rapid in or the rapid in alcohol. So we need institutions that infrastructure that has to be constant. And I would propose to you that we should be thinking about this as critical areas of infrastructure in the same way we think about those, in the same way we think about this. What do I mean by that? There's I don't mean optimism, and I want to make the distinction because with optimism and a sense of philosophical and thoughts on philosophy and for a particular outcome, right? And for that to happen, you have to have visualized it and imagined it. The belief in the possibility of that outcome, and critically, the urgency to be shaping that outcome. And that agency requires skill, it requires the will, it requires the pathway to move you towards that outcome. That is what I mean by hope in this context. So thinking about hope not as a sentiment, but as a method that can be cultivated, and as a mandate, in the same way we talk about sustainable institutions, sustainability in terms of institutions. Have you heard anyone talk about as a virtue of an institution with infrastructure to shape that? Out there, right? I love this because it speaks to, again, the comments by Mr. Sharma. I learned quite a bit around, the purpose of the country and the goal of growth as not being the end point, but the end point being economic, social justice. And that requires, that's transformation, that's a societal transformation. And this was Brazilian philosopher the key condition for action. Without hope, there can be no sustained commitment to transformation. This is my framework for hope infrastructure. That the infrastructure can be deconstructed into digital infrastructure, intellectual infrastructure, and social infrastructure. And that infrastructure enable the conditions of emergence ways that we know, ways of knowing, ways of feeling, ways of doing, and ways of becoming. In terms of knowing, the knowledge, how to ensure that we are creating knowledge that is produced. In terms of doing, how to ensure that either advocacy or implementation that is locally rooted, shaped by the people who stand, who are most competent of the actions that are being taken and have the most to gain. The future oriented. So remember how I framing of hope, you haven't imagined. And so we have to ensure that we are future investment in people and skills. And yes, people, but we also equip them with the future oriented mindset. And that's is internal mindset. And yes, from individual pursuits. How do we do that collectively? Learn lessons from different parts of the world and the social infrastructure that allows that to happen. With this is what I hope was a little bit of practice. We talk about people, by the way, in order to you also have to understand the past from the past. And it's not, around yesterday morning, but the reason that I want to understand it today, and I went along with this, no problem to monitor. I can particular market sequence, right? I'm very particularly around the park, at least very early this morning. I also but also I'm looking at a little bit with one of our initiatives, the Citizens Initiative. In cities like Lagos, Bogota, Johannesburg, Nairobi, we're equipping young people with these tools as infrastructure environment to use them to the way that it engages its makers, and to use that of shaping their cities and the future of their cities. So, the young people in Lagos, before the marathon, they were running the marathon, walkability race, etc. On marathon day when the roads were closed. They found the marathon. Walking in public spaces. The information you have a non-motorized transport policy that needs to be implemented yet. And then there's you with the and then now essentially Nairobi and their policy and so the only our band to be part of shaping them. This is my last one. Which is that the future we want will be determined whether we have and invest in the infrastructure and the institutions that allow us to thrive in this liminal space, that allow us to go to believe in the past, that generate health, not just to matter. Allow us to believe in the wisdom of young people to reimagine the future. Because this is the time to do that. And really critically allow us to invest in infrastructure of hope as a foundation for transformation. Thank you.
And now we're going to have a panel discussion. So I'd like to actually invite Tallulah back on stage and with James Robinson and with Mike Hexton and Russia. Thank you both for your talk, and thank you for joining us. So, one big thing, Anuradha, you are a legend, giant in economics in India, distinguished fellow at the Centre for Social and Economic Progress in New Delhi, senior positions at the World Bank and IMF, and you served as Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission of India, which was a Cabinet Minister position, and you're an architect of this phenomenal reform and economic development in India between 2007-2017 period. Have you got any reflections on the talk that Tallulah and James have just given? And do you see a new development model emerging?
Well, I think we have an initial reflection. I would like to both of them for really very thought-provoking presentation. I want to make some very, very important points. We will go into that for model emerged as a completely different story. And to make it's not that simple. I mean, neither of the lecturer or the presenter the you guys talk. If you recognize the nature of that complexity, you put the limit on the top. But you know, the complexity doesn't really help. Means you want to talk about hope. If you get hope, you're dead. There's nothing else to do. How do you know the world does? I mean, one of the United States have hope. They hope that they're going to play a completely new society. They're not basing their hope on any recognized scientific method. Doesn't confuse an internally consistent objective. And I think Professor Hamilton rightly talked about the move from the old liberal notion that, it's a one-day can't do that, you can wear, etc. and so on. A very important part of progress. So, in a political situation, when you direction, and when you may not going to have to work the movie. And I think you need to distinguish it.
Okay. So, how do we connect that hope to the scientific evidence and economic incentives and all the big infrastructure?
The reason and this is what I'm saying for applications to those problems of climate. Not as a method and as a mandate as I'm talking about. It is, we often use it for using as a method, right? So the reason why deconstructionists say, well, if you give them building agency, there'll be construction to the pathways to state and to market evidence. Not within and if it's not in a social nobody doing is it then it's not like it's just the thing. If it's not, if they're not, if we thought but we're not going to make space for it. And so not about how it's people, and I work a lot on cities across the continent of Africa, where the median age is 19, and I have people up to work.
Let's pick this up as well then, James, on, so Montek makes the point that Magnus supporters also have hope, and but this, not but in a different kind of way. Can we explore a little bit more this this idea of this great inequality in the US and how that is destabilizing, and what does this mean?
Something about everything, money is not some objective thing floating outside society either. You might have noticed in the United States at the moment there's an enormous rejection of technical expertise or what is part of this project, this liberal project of like, you know what we're talking about, you don't know what we're talking about, so I'm going to see what you can do. A bit more on a kind of understanding the scientific wisdom, absolutely, but that's not a simple of a kind of ideological model also. So how do you convey that information when, science is rejected in many domains, not just in economics, but in medicine, in every way you see that in the United States. And the wants to make that kind of this is not a straightforward thing.
How robust are those institutions, do you think?
Well, I think like institutions have always been challenged. I think the problem in the United States is that it's a failure institution. There's a failure of inclusion, they sort of disappear, this enormous rise in inequality of institutions to adapt to globalization, to adapt to technical change, to adapt to change in the labor market. So I think this is an issue of sort of defining how water the institutions we have from the church. No, the institutions have to change, like democratic institutions have to change. People just have no trust in democratic institutions in huge parts of the world. So when people rebuild institutions and change institutions, we find ways to make them more accountable, more democratic. So I think the question we should be asking, how do we make institutions work rather than just, stand by rather?
Questions to the audience in a minute or two. So, and I'm going to ask one particular question, but have some questions prepared, and the microphones will come round. But the one economic reality here in India today that India needs to deal with.
Well, I think the point that the new events and that billions its reality, its devastating seriousness, into people's consciousness, its problem. And then we had this wonderful experience of Bangalore. Had meeting in New Delhi. I think but when you look at the attack that Palula put out, actually move together and change together. The political journey is to oversimplify. I'm became a hero. Because in this, done get out of control, and then you have a whole period of prosperity. So, what he said, now, people need to tell them. It's what I said. It's because all the conditions. But one it's very difficult on the ground that you're going to adopt a system by the first and make a lot of changes. Most people are going to be back to your way behind you. In the democratic system, you've got to vote back to office if you want to do anything. And how to do that is very complicated. Understand. There's just no understanding of the complexity. It's a failure of the define how to make progress. And when you talk progress, how do you define complexity? I mean, at any there are hundreds of things we need to do, but the next question is right now.
We're going to from the audience, and let's see, if you put your hands up, we'll try to see you, we'll get a microphone to you. I see three questions there. If we take two, there's a person in the red there, and a person in the right shirt. If we could take two at a time, that would be great. The panel and one takes with your understanding of India approach grounded in scientific knowledge. Both the department of scientific knowledge has little hope of succeeding. Now, my question to you is what is done based on the scientific knowledge that exists so far has led to extreme inequality in many countries. So, in the future to ensure that such inequality does not persist. On next as well, and we'll do both at the same time. So, you know that the world 20-30 years from now will be with people of my age that there's no inertia against doing anything meaningful in the sense that we're not organizing like the movements that you've done in cities of Africa. I don't think there's going to be that much, let's say, excitement about doing those things in cities in India because the democratic systems that we have in place are not very inclusive and listen to our voices. So how do we make our institutions adapt to that? Like, we know that the growing voice of the youth is very important, and there are a lot of problems that we are facing as societally, economically. But the feeling that I think we got the idea there. So, would you?
The university work is that the knowledge creation. And so the example that we do in my is on the ground because there's knowledge generation and give them the tool to be able to generate evidence and not separate from academic institutions is one thing. I'm not I think that maybe it doesn't always And so to enable ways for young people to come daily policy.
In one sentence, maybe how can we, how can Indian institutions allow young people to flourish? How young people can claim faith in these fora?
One of inequality. I think it's a problem all around the world. It is a problem in India also. But I don't know what you want inequality. We don't have to use professional side, but what we may have inequality before. But you can have global equality after taxation, if you have the right kind of taxes. But I mean, in India, we giving taxes in. I mean, finance minister after finance minister, and now raising the income tax about the level at which tax is levied in India, I will raise income in power than in any other country. If you're all concerned about inequality, should not be we can do on the tax front. The second thing is really an Indian curse. And quite frankly, to cities, cities have successful government. It's a highly concentrated system where the nation is constantly happening for everything. Now, let me illustrate this by an example. Not only was the war happened to be part of the delegation that Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi took in 1989 to China, within 40 years. And I just looking, we were landing in Shanghai, and we were looking at the program, and the program said, given to the Prime Minister by the Mayor of Shanghai. Okay? And I said, what is this? As important as a problem. I mean, it was even in the late 80s. Really young China. And I guess Bengaluru also. And then they run down the road politically in a sensible way. And I don't know what the constitutional responsibility for the government.
On this panel, I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us. Montek Singh Arwaya, Tamil Oni, and James Robinson. A big round of applause.
For the brain, but they're going to jump straight into the second section. An institution the courage to dream and read it a reality. I'm doing a picture of us on stage and will lead an institution of mind to protect
thank you for being here. And I think we have to bring presentation, and so, we don't really need a break. I think they're all tired to move on. And to keep the momentum going, I'd like to now invite Professor David McMahon. Welcome to hear from Professor McMahon. This is my introduction. Professor David McMahon was born and brought up in Scotland, but moved to the US to do a PhD, and after that to a very, very distinguished career in chemistry in the US. Currently, the David McMahon Distinguished Professor of Chemistry at Princeton University, and also, of course, you all know he won the Nobel in chemistry in 2021. The it is a very important part of it. But I should sort of mention also that Professor McMahon created maybe all of the component of the Nobel Prize to an endowment for the education of financially sort of trained students in Scotland, and therefore to give them agency.
Very much for that very clear introduction. It's absolutely fantastic to be here. I've never been to India before. This is my first time in India. I've only been here for 2.5 days. And it's been mind-blowing. So thank you for the chance to be here. Very nice to you. I'll talk about chemistry. One from basically taking the spot at the beginning is that we couldn't just keep the Scottish people. I'm going to tell you about what is the future and future enzymes is actually catalysis. Catalysis is absolutely massive, and I'm going to try and explain to you that is, but I'm not talking about the origins of a scientific breakthrough in catalysis, which comes from my lab. And then I translate to talk about the future. Now, maybe wondering which is catalysis. So I want all of you to sort of look around this room and everything that you can see right now with chemistry involves a chemical reaction. Everything with chemical reaction. And Princeton, if you look around my life, basically everything you can see is used by chemical reactions. If you focus on that's my coffee cup right there, there's coffee cup, and if you have the chemical reaction to the coffee, there's the sequence that you would find in coffee. Typically require they're not spontaneous most of the time. We're going to energy diagram. Now, this is not going to get too technical, but the way we explain energy diagram to high school students is the following. Every day you were going home, you would have to walk over a cellular cell every single day. A lot of energy every single day. And it becomes cumbersome. It would be unhappy because you have to walk over a very large hill. Once you build a funnel that goes straight up to go home every day, that's a wonderful thing. And that's exactly what the catalysis does. So it makes a good chemical reaction. But most importantly, if you learn one thing from myself today, it's impossible and makes them possible. That's what catalysis does. Favorite catalytic reactions, I'm going to show you 9. And the global population of the world over 2,000 years. And there's going to be 8 billion people on this earth. Now, if it has 8 billion people on earth right now, if it wasn't for this one catalytic reaction, the kind of nitrogen over to ammonia, It's an incredibly important catalytic reaction. And it uses 1% of the world's energy supply every single day. That's how important it is. Now, why do you need this chemical reaction, this catalytic process to do this? Well, you need it to grow crops. You need it to have enough food to allow 8 billion people to actually be on Earth at the present time. This is one of my favourite little factoids about this. If you think of your body right now, and you think of all the food you go through, and all the life that are in your body right now, there's nothing in your body comes from a factory in Germany. It's out nothing else, okay? That's specific. And so, I want to talk about that the world's chemical reactions on an industrial scale use catalysis, and 50% of global GDP at the present time is based upon catalysis. And that number is only going to increase as we tackle climate change and sustainability. Okay, so why am I interested in catalysis? Well, my story comes in where in 2021, along with John West, we won the Nobel Prize for a thing called organocatalysis. What does that mean? I just told you what catalysis means, so I'm now going to try and tell you what organo means. And I have to take you back to 1988. I'll explain why in a few moments, but what were the solutions for catalysis in 1998? So the catalysis, which is using the enzymes, which is something called catalysis, and then there's the most complex catalysis, which is to actually use metals. This was developed by human beings in a lab to use chemistry, and it's absolutely everywhere. Now, it's a field of many with using metals to do catalysis. This is a typical metal catalyst, and even if you're not human, most of them basically in two parts, the left-hand side, the right-hand side. The right-hand side of the metal. Now, these metals are expensive, they're toxic, and they're often non-sustainable. If you think of which is in your iPhone, or palladium, which are in your car, we need palladium on Earth to last for another 90 years. Then it was completely gone, completely not sustainable. So it's a major question in terms of using metals to do catalysis. Now, this is the organic molecule, and typically it is supposed to be the metals in place so that it could do the chemistry. But again, they're inexpensive, they're safe, they're sustainable, and it's even the organic molecules. And we go right back into the life cycle. When we pass on, we go right back into the life cycle. So we're completely sustainable as organic molecules. So when you look at anything else to think about, what is the role of the catalyst? And eventually this became known as organocatalysis. Well, initially, I got a job as an assistant professor. Over in California, I got this job, it's my first job, and I was up for my very first group in the very first year. This is 10 past 10, on a Friday week, we're in lab, this young group, really trying to have an impact, really trying to make a difference. And what we're going to do is, well, I decided I wanted to try and do this thing called organocatalysis. What was I wanting to do this? Well, I was convinced at the time that these organic molecules are broadly available from nature. The second thing is the human body will not take to water or air. Because it's so big, it's incredibly inexpensive. The instrumentation or contraption to use organic molecules, they exist happily out in our environment, and they're not toxic and they're completely sustainable. So this is what I wanted to do. The problem is I have no idea how to do it. I have no good ideas whatsoever. But one of them, in lab, sits in work. So there's a first-year graduate student in my group, a young co-worker. He came to me and said, what is the mechanism of reductive amination? Now, he's a very successful chemist in his own right. He's going to show you what this thing is in the chemistry department. But he was a student and now being a young professor, I wanted to run to the board and teach him this mechanism, which is what I did. And I kept it taken in the moon, but it was response in the moon. And when it's done this distance, I have to put the electronics to do the subsequent chemistry. And right then, I had what I would call the quintessential eureka moment. Because I thought, wait a minute, if you look at this moon with an accident saturated aldehyde, it's alpha in many minds. That was like a lot like a field of metal catalysis, which has been known for many, many decades. Metal catalysis, which has been used for hundreds of reactions, and in the world, to replace the metal with an organic molecule, there's basically no examples of being able to do that. I think the basic simultaneous equations that means that organic molecules should be able to catalyze literally hundreds of reactions. And this is the very first time we tested it in the notebook of superior lens, because these two wanted to generate, and instead of having a metal or a catalyst, we're now going to have an organic molecule. And when we perform this reaction with what? It worked the first time, which was incredibly exciting. And I remember when I got this result, going into my office, closing the door, opening the screen, and jumping up and down for 5 minutes. That we got this result. Published the first paper. And the first paper, we had to come up with a new name for a completely new reaction. So the name of the company was organic catalysis. And we need to get that, well, what's in a name? Is name important, and it's incredibly important. This is Ron Jacob Barbelia, very famous scientist from Sweden. There are 100 different vocabulary for science for things like catalysis, proteins, polymers, isomers, organic, inorganic. And the importance of this is having followed into the modern era, things like the revolution of AI, nanotechnology, organic catalysis. It's the biggest framework in which scientists can discuss these very large areas of science. So that was the name. The second paper was a concept of what's called the genetic activation mode. That's a very fancy way of basically saying this idea for one chemical reaction, which is what the hundreds of chemical reactions. So I showed that in the paper, but we haven't actually tested that. I've just been done bold and saying this. What I found was this is the original reaction, but then with the other reactions it went bang, bang, and it stopped. It stopped up the 2 reactions. So this is how right? Which is the world. Just because of hundreds of reactions, it's only working for 3. That's very disappointing. But Joe Austin and Chris Fox make a very bold prediction that when you know and you see what happens over here, this is now work broadly for hundreds of reactions. Now, to try and demonstrate to non-chemistry audience how bold this prediction is, I want to use this analogy. Ibrahimovic is a very famous women's football player. He's a football god. And I'm sure he's terrible bold things. He's very bold in the things he does. There's only one bold thing that he does, which is this way. He does this overhead kick, bang, from there, an amazing goal. Okay. So I'm going to put this video in the Nobel website. Newspapers in London, especially some of London, got very angry. And they which is to score against England. Fair, but what a goal! Fantastic. When we do something and have this beautiful outcome, and like gangbusters. Other people such as Jordan and Hanyasi, many other people that are developing catalysts, and now we're can this make people reaction to use organic technology? That people often ask me, or what's the application? What can you use it for? And I really the second one, but I thought I'd just show you two. The first one is the question of smell. One thing I've loved about being in India is the smells are incredible. And it's really important to the world. It's used in an enormous amount on a daily basis. And chemical process where the really of the body in one chemical step instead of 6 chemical steps, which is a huge reduction in the amount of energy to make this one perfume. Applications of organic plastics have been for medicine and for making medicine. And there's many examples of it. I was looking at last week or something like a new cancer treatment they're using for building using organic plastics. So this is another medicine now. We might be in treatment for February and we're able to make this medicine basically because of using organic catalysis. Now, the third advantage of organic catalysis is this idea of talking about institutions. And it's now becoming known as democratizing catalysis. What does that mean? Well, organic catalysis is so affordable and it's so it's incredibly accessible. It's not only taught by every country in the world, but there's a research performed in every country in the world. And where does the next idea going to come from within organic catalysis? Now, I actually don't know, but I know it's not going to be based on who has the most money or who has the most resources. It's going to be that idea, and that's something that for me is incredibly important. In terms of India, so organic catalysis is huge in India. And it's performed in almost every department here, but this tremendous work is performed in organic catalysis. Here in Bangalore, companies that still do income that produce organic catalysis. Hyderabad, there's many other companies which are already using organic catalysis, which has been fantastic. Here too. I'm talking about what is the future. And this is really think about catalysis for the future. We're talking about 8 billion people and how we're actually going to go forward. And what I can tell you right now is that there are ways to do sustainable catalysis. Total catalysis, electrical catalysis, it's really going to get increasing the population of our world. We're going to have to come up with new types of catalysis. Very quickly by making this one point, I'm going to tell you right now, with respect to climate change, we are one catalytic reaction away from solving climate change. That's absolutely true. So, by a show of hands, I want to answer the following question. How many people think that climate change and climate change is a problem? Could you put your hands up? Okay, I think that's like everyone in the audience. How many people know that we're one catalytic reaction away from solving climate change? No one. And then report, you want to talk about the future we can fly with confidence or ambition. We have to be able to explain to the world how important these scientific areas really are, because we really are that close. Okay, with that, we'll finish off. I'll just say thank you so much for your attention.
Professor McNair. And just a few, when he started his talk, he told us that a chemical reaction can be processed by cooking, adjusting sometimes the molecule old and trying to get to, some beautiful place on the other side. And I like to speak of public health, which I think, to me, has been a little bit of a serious task, where I'm asking people perpetually trying, to push this boulder at the hip. But I think Dr. Kang has shown us that, if you put it in your effort, if you have the optimism and the hope for it, you can actually go over to the other side, and you can actually get to to these beautiful green valleys on the other side. Dr. Kang has had a very distinguished career at Christian Medical College. He was also a pioneer in getting vaccines qualified in India, particularly the rotavirus vaccine. And many of you may be familiar with her because she played a very important role in public health communication during the COVID-19 crisis. So, currently with the Gates Foundation, and without further ado, I'd like to invite Dr. Kang to speak to us. Thank you, Helen, for the introduction and the people in this audience have never had diarrhea. Anybody? One person? Two people? Bad. If this is not you are the kind you are. People used to die of diarrhea every year. At the age of 5. The numbers have come down approximately 1 million, and about half of those were children under 5. So there has been improvement over the 60 years. If I ask you about causes of diarrhea, you're going to tell me that hygiene, waste. I can tell you that ourselves work really well for bacteria and for parasites, not for parasites. In global health over the past 60 years, I'm going to take you back to 1971. In 1971, India was a country. Before that, that was but before that actually started, a lot of people started to come across to West Bengal. People to Calcutta, and then when Calcutta started to crumble, they took refugee camps all along the border. The border is about 4,000 kilometers, and from refugee camps. If you think back to 1971, the that those refugee camps did not have a lot to offer. So if you think about for the 9 million people that were estimated to have come within that time. More than that, the monsoon. And you create the circumstances for people. And that what people were together. There was work that had been done in Calcutta and Dhaka in the 1960s. And we have to probably give information to people. We have people like you, and they just weren't the number of people that you needed. You were able to actually bring up this life-saving treatment in those times. In fact, when Calcutta broke up, the mortality rate was 6%. So out of 10 people who got cholera actually died of it. That changed the game during that time. And what it was an understanding of gut physiology and of enteric infections and the ability to take care.
It was believed that actually resulted in essentially the in cholera was supposed to be everyone that now. Actually, that architecture was not very good. The law was a was not into the cholera. Bacteria into the epithelium into a receptor, and that was able to the secretions that doesn't sodium in the cellular. Studies began to be done in it. The way of replacing that the recognition that in order for sodium to be absorbed in the intestine, you also have to give glucose because the transporter carried both sodium and glucose together. What was essentially a small finding and converting it into a treatment was TamilNaduPolitics, who was refugee camps of Bengal, and he tested how to mix salt and sugar together in water in the right proportion, and this was used to treat the refugees. This resulted in a decrease in mortality from 5% to 3%. There was a 20% reduction in the dehydration, but without the TamilNaduPolitics stick, you would not have gotten this kind of large-scale in-field study. It took until 1974 for WHO to recommend oral dehydration therapy. That about 70 million lives have been saved so far because of oral rehydration solution. What causes acute watery diarrhea is the cause of an ongoing pandemic, cholera. This disease affects children, and this is virus. Is a cause of diarrhea in very young children. This was described as a cause of diarrhea in 1973. And vaccines started to be experimented on pretty early. They started in the late 1970s, and in the 1990s we had a vaccine, which was to be used in the US. If I show you diarrheal disease, these are due to diarrhea. Where do you think the vaccine should be used? Very few deaths. You don't expect children to die of diarrhea in the US. Where do vaccines have gone? It has gone to Africa, it should have come to Asia, it wound up in the US. And that was because the virus is a demographic virus. It affects children in rich countries and in poor countries. Unfortunately, the scientific vaccines have been made. One of the problems is that, like many other vaccines discovered in the West, it was very difficult to look at women in India. It cost $200 to immunize one child. We knew that we needed a vaccine because we had done studies to identify how much diarrhea there was due to rotavirus. It was 40% of diarrheal hospitalizations in children under 5. And we needed somebody who would put the vaccine in India, a country that had a safety before. The person who was Dr. Raj Khan, then the Secretary of Biotechnology, who was found unique coronavirus in the and then had characterized it in his laboratory and with the U.S. National Institutes of Health and other organizations companies to make this vaccine. India has never done a phase 3 vaccine trial looking at efficacy ever before. We came together as scientists, as industry, and we did the first efficacy trial in the country. This resulted in a vaccine that now costs 50 adults, so you can only take a child for $1.50 for 3 doses. This was in 2016 and is now being used in many parts of the world. The map that you see there in green shows all the countries that have now introduced the vaccine. And what I'd like to show you is the mix. If you look at the graph that is on the left-hand corner, left-hand only graph on the slide, the blue of the vaccine with a multinational company, and the yellow and the green are the Indian companies. Not only did we get right for ourselves, we also got for the world. In 2023, 3% of the poorest countries in the world received rotavirus vaccines that have been made in India. So we had people institutions together, and the vaccine really meant. Vaccines, but we know vaccines that have been made in the world and narrow spectrum of the entire development process of making vaccines. We went from preclinical studies into phase 4 the effectiveness of the vaccines as they were used in India. The vaccine industry was had this little blip in 2020 to 2022, and India was able to work the vaccine on the platform that exists. India was the only country that had a DNA vaccine, an mRNA vaccine, an inactivated vaccine, a vaccine vaccine that was a subunit component and an adenovirus vector vaccine. We conducted trials overall. If you take numbers of people who participated in vaccine studies, India is as much as in every other country in the world. That means we had an immunization program that delivered 2.2 billion doses of vaccines. So, what our country can do. And if I think about the future and what we would want out of it, can you think about the question where if you breathe you whether you have tuberculosis, pneumonia, or any other infectious disease, that will predict your risk of heart attack 5 years or 10 years from now. Those are not possible today. So what I will leave you with is that's the ambition we have today to be able to see the problem for the world. What would your ambitions be for the generation that is growing up in science in India today? Thank you very much.
Dr. Khan for that extraordinarily inspiring talk. And so now we will move on to our panel discussion. I'd like to invite Dr. Khan to please be seated, Professor Macmillan, and also like to invite Kush Parmar onto the stage. Kush Parmar is the managing partner of 5AM Ventures, which is a leading investment firm focused on funding and building the next generation life science companies. He's also got a very strong connection to Bangalore. He's a board member and co-founder of Immunation Therapies, which is based in Bangalore, and is pioneering both cell and gene therapies in the country at very modest cost. So welcome, all three of you. So I want to start by, connecting to some things which we heard about earlier, about things not being a one-way street, about the interconnectedness of things, about infrastructure being health infrastructure, and so on. So I wanted to pick on one particular interconnectedness, and that is between public health and pharma. This could be in multiple ways. That, if you look at the kind of challenges that we will face going forward, it will come from challenges we know will come up in large numbers due to nutrition, diet, and so on. We can see that we're going to look at these going forward. But also there are issues of feedback where tuberculosis and so on, that we are getting a lot of population which is drug resistant, and this is entirely to do with public health. So what do you think we could do going forward to address this kind of interconnectedness in a more coherent way?
The anti-bacterial kind of in the right direction. Control really is. It means using for policymakers to simplify tools, and that's what they will do. And I think for us to be able to really make a difference, we have to make them aware of connectedness and complexity. Because without that, you will have only part.
I think we should be for India to be a leading country. India waits outside of this vaccine, rotavirus vaccine example. In general, 10 years before new medicine is developed somewhere else, before it can be made accessible for India and for other parts of the world. That seems to be unacceptable. And the country has done a tremendous job building and expertise in chemistry, in manufacturing, industriousness, to build a huge generic industry that's been very, very productive to the country and to the world. As we just witnessed in the presentation about the vaccine and the kind of impact that it can have for India and for the world's problems, because not where these medicines are invented are not necessarily thinking about the problems India wants to solve and the rest of the world wants to solve. And in order to build the infrastructure and the capabilities to take on those kinds of problems that are unique, not just here but in other parts of the world, it needs to be going through an innovation-driven regime, and that is immensely awaiting here in India. We've had sporadic examples, but they need to be systematic now.
Thank you. So maybe I'll just follow on that innovation, and continue to be a barrier to face these very interconnected problems, and both in your thinking and to be able to respond to these sort of new viruses coming up. So question to you, Professor Macmillan, that what do you think would be the role of chemistry important? So what do you think the role of chemistry, particularly in the pharma sector, is going to be going forward? And what do you think you could do to take the lead over here?
Yeah, it's interesting. So within chemistry, we always call ourselves the central science because we feel like we're the central component to what everyone else is doing. The problem is we don't bother to tell anyone else that. Very self-satisfying in an interesting way. But it is incredibly important. And if you think about the pharmaceutical industry, now it's developing many different modalities. But yet, for the future, for the world, and especially for countries all over the world, in particular, are unbelievably important. And what's going on also for vaccines and other areas is not just important, it is critical. It's 100% critical to whatever happens for pharmaceuticals. It's always interesting for you and I to talk to someone who's not a chemist and say, do you know where medicines come from? They say, yeah, they come from doctors from MDs. They come from the chemist. What does it mean for India? India, I think, has built the fantastic educational system, which is teaching years, but one of them has been funding people for over 100 years here, more even longer, has been teachers. And we may not like to hear this, but China has been working in China. And still China has very developed. The youth is growing rapidly, and it has also, though, this fantastic chemistry group here that with the right resourcing as it continues doing extensively, it's a position to do what Chris is talking about, which is the benefit of India and the benefit of the pharmaceutical companies for the future of India, but also for the world.
Yeah, thank you. We talked about growth, and I think that the economy has been growing very fast. Mr. Sharma reminded us that we are the third largest economy in 36 and on track to become the third. And what what is happening so far in the future is not repeat the past, but what we've seen so far is for economies to grow, commodity consumption has to grow. And commodity consumption has always been associated with pollution, with environmental degradation. And one catalytic reaction away from solving climate change. I assume you were talking about fixing carbon dioxide, like maybe you were talking about more complex ideas. But I think like we have a little bit more from you. How do you think we could play a role in allowing, economic progress, allowing more energy to be consumed, while at the same time not degrading the environment?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it really is a question. If you think about all energy on Earth, all energy on Earth really comes from solar energy. We have all the light forms we have, everything comes from solar. The problem is that we have used what we call a thermodynamic source instead of a kinetic source, which is fossil fuels. When you could possibly CO2 fixation, there's other ways of doing it, which involve normalization of CO2, that's another reaction. But it's not we use going to effectively school and the field to come up with the field to become the energy. And it's just like that, so we can use solar energy directly. People have known that for decades and decades and decades. That is a 100% in chemistry question and a chemistry solution. And where you have to be provisioned is how do you use sunlight, for example, to store energy along the way. But the other thing that people know that you will not be able to replace fossil fuels in anywhere. And for example, to use for fuel for different things. Which is incredibly rare. And if we could just take programs and run them, we solve this huge problem. But one of the really main thing the world is not even really connected to each other. But is a lot of real chemistry problems that we're not usually identifying as problems widely to basically leverage the enormous community of chemists out there who are really smart, believe it or not, chemists are smart. That will be able to effectively solve these problems.
Actually, Dr. Khan, because we gave us the fire up talk, I'd like to sort of end with you. Unfortunately, we have time only for one more. I'd like to ask you, what do you think is the main challenge that we could and should take up in India as far as public health is concerned?
To me, the biggest challenge will get attitude in infectious diseases, because that's my background. It really is tuberculosis and what we can do about that. And the non-TB one is the rise in non-communicable diseases, particularly cardiovascular and diabetes. I think we should be thinking about solutions. There is a lot more to be done.
We could now go to the audience for questions. If we are talking about the future, I'd like to encourage, particularly younger members of the audience to ask questions. Go in the middle. At the very, very beginning, it's a wonderful question. India is a country that went 4 years from recognizing that this country did not have a very complicated cell therapy that can be transformative for cancer called CAR-T medicines. It was a country that did not have that, did not have any access to that, to mobilizing efforts, including top institutions in Bombay, also here in Bengaluru as well. People like yourself joining these efforts to mobilize returning back to India to join these efforts, and within 4 years going from that recognition of an aspen to manufacturing, developing these medicines, conducting clinical trials, to having them now approved. There's now a few approved medicines, some of the most complicated, most expensive medicines in the world, available in India, and that's just the beginning of the journey, and it starts many other efforts. I believe that is just the beginning of a whole revolution of India transforming from being an influential generic supplier for the world to an innovative supplier of medicines for the world, and from that lay the foundation to address problems very specific to India to the world as well.
Thank you.
Absolutely, and that's why I mentioned the top institution in Mumbai being one of the pioneering institutions. Thank you. So if you could go to the gentleman in the trying to do something new to the best of our capabilities. My question is to Professor Nobel. Do we develop an intuition where we can distinguish whether what we are doing is eventually going to make a big change? How do we develop that intuition? Yeah. A lot of the time, to win a Nobel Prize. What do I tell everyone who leads my group who go, whether they go to the industry or become an academic themselves? I have a very simple test. When you come to an idea, you think it's cool, and it's not that cool. You think it's cool. And you can say, that's cool. That's really cool. It turns out you're not the only one who's going to think that. Lots of other people are going to think that too. But you have to be incredibly honest with yourself
And a lot of things in science, we do things for the wrong reasons. We do it because we think we've got paper, or we'll be patient, or we'll get hungry, or we'll do these other things. And to my mind, that's not the way of doing science. Maybe I'm lucky, a luxury, I don't have to think that way. But honestly, it always comes back to your own self-analysis of what do you think is cool. And it doesn't really, the answer doesn't really matter what other people think anyway. So I do really like it.
Much for that. I mean, I think that was a great answer. It's also probably the first time I've heard cool and scientific. We go to one more question, the gentleman in the jacket. My question to Dr. Khan and the panelists. You did mention that your focus would be on non-communicable diseases. You mentioned diabetes and cardiovascular diseases. Is the interim that we focus on preventive healthcare and literature? That is lifestyle-related issues with organization, planning, and everything, and it could have a great cascading effect. Practitioners, institutions, and other ways that can help. The question is, what can we bring to tools that allow us to both prevent and not duplicate when you have complications and the cost of the healthcare system are higher and more difficult to manage. So, no question, a focus on prevention is really important, but prevention doesn't always work for everybody. So, then we need to be thinking about solutions for care. And looking to the innovators, I'd like to point out to the audience is it has formulation and chemistry. But when it comes to innovation, we wind up having a gap between the excellent work that is done in institutions like IISc, like CIFR, and what it takes for us to get to a point to translate those innovations. But what I have seen in the last 10 years or so is that it's changed quite dramatically. There is greater engagement from government, there is greater engagement from the private sector, there is greater engagement from the diaspora. In most in the innovation in healthcare certainly, but in a lot of other fields as well. I'm kind of regretting the fact that I'm the age that I am, that I'm not you, like now, with a few science ahead of me, because I think you're willing to make those changes. And thank you. We have many more decades. Unfortunately, our time is up, and I think we could have really gone on for a lot longer, but we've done out of time, so thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you all very much. We're coming to a close. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have. We'd like to invite the campaign back on stage for a few words.
Questions and anything you would like to say particularly?
I was inspired by the example of organo our developers, because working in developing countries, any sort of technological innovation that can level the playing field in that way, I find that's absolutely amazing. You know, I say the two, you know, of one of the poor countries in the world is working talent. Anything that can allow us not to waste all that talent in Africa, I think that's absolutely fantastic. I also love this example of oral rehydration therapy and a kind of innovation in the South, which is where all over the world, about all these real scientists in the room. I guess the that was that caused the famine and disaster in Bangladesh, and the war and the conflict and the violence. And that's why we need social scientists too.
Social scientists as well. No, I do love sociology, and I do think many people who do chemistry could benefit. I love reading sociology books. I've learned so much from reading sociology books. But I'm really important to focus on unity, and he worked with the idea of coming to India and giving this presentation. Even discussing it with so many people about being here, it's just so here, and let's come back to the hope part. It's just really confident and aspiration that you can really come to it. It feels like this is kind of India's moment in India, and you look at people who know it, and they're putting together all these components for the willingness to also come through. It's nice to come here and talk to all of you about it. It's been fantastic, but ultimately, this is about what you're going to do. And for me, it's useful for you. So the rest of us is really looking forward to seeing exactly what's about to happen. So thanks very much.
So we are going to request the really documented with like, so we want to start with the honors and help us get on the same frame with him.
This is a super question. We're going to do this selfie, and bizarrely, I haven't done this before. So there's another question to press. Actually, and somehow, is it? I didn't know all of this. And we're going to do this down, and we're going to do it.
Today's time?
Is that well, you have to be in the middle?
I don't want to win you up again.
Do you want me to?
What?